Well, first, I will start by following Wojciech's good advice. If you can, everyone, please make sure you're on mute. If there are children or dogs or conversations happening in the background, they will distract from the meeting. And we've got such an amazing panel here with us today. I know I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to say. Welcome from Catholic University. We're so happy to have you all here. I hope that you have been enjoying this series as much as I have. I'm not even in law, and this has been really gripping for me. So I really appreciate the opportunities that you're providing us to learn from you and with you. So welcome and have a great meeting.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aubri O'Connor, for your introduction. And right now, let me pass the floor to our speakers. Firstly, they will present their presentations, and after that, we'll open the floor for discussion. So think of your questions that you will write on chat, and then after an hour of the recorded part, we'll be able to discuss the issues of your interest more privately, just by sharing our ideas. So thank you very much, and let me pass the floor to Professor Paweł.
Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be here. Warm welcome from Krakow, but also to DC, to Washington, DC, and all the people on the other side of the internet, wherever you are. In the beginning, I'd like to congratulate and thank the organizers for the invitation to this very interesting webinar. It's a great pleasure to be part of the panel that is devoted to the interconnection between law and public policy, which somehow refers to the essence of most of my research conducted at the Jagiellonian University. I'm even more proud, as was mentioned, as a graduate of the Faculty of Law and Administration and of the CUA and JU first edition of the School of American Law program, which definitely strengthened my research interest in American legal system and in American political system. And on the other hand, the other half of my identity belongs to political science, in which I got my degrees, and I'm pursuing my research, focusing mainly on US constitutionalism. I assume that is why the organizers decided to invite me to this distinguished panel. Thank you. I would like to talk about the topical interconnection from the perspective of, as I usually call it, the interference or the clash of law and politics. I'm definitely the least practical, as you will see in this panel, compared to other distinguished panelists. I'm not a practitioner, but a researcher who observes and analyzes different aspects of the relation between public policy and law occurring in various US governmental institutions, such as the US Supreme Court, US Congress, independent regulatory agencies, US Department of Justice, especially the Office of the US Attorney General and the Office of the Solicitor General, but also the offices of special prosecutors or independent counsels, as well as to observe these interconnections in the electoral process, including federal campaign finance laws and policies. It's obvious for me that law and public policy are deeply interconnected, not only in the area of constitutional law. Politicians create the law, they enforce the law, and sometimes, many of them believe they can do this, they also interpret the law. They're subject to several pressures stemming from either their own approach towards their role as public policy officers. So some can pursue a social mission, others are driven by certain ideologies, or they are driven by the approach of others. And these others are willing to obtain concrete outcomes from the legislative process and enforcement of legal provisions. Well, in my opinion, the crucial question in our debate refers to the issue of loyalty. Politician or public policy officer, as any other citizen, should obey legal norms and therefore prove her or his loyalty to the law. However utopian it may sound, if politics prevails over the law, then we can talk about the deterioration of the rule of law and democracy. Unfortunately, we can observe numerous examples of such processes happening all over the world. So I'm looking into the US system, but I guess we can also give some examples from our Polish soil and in many other countries. Some of these processes are really occurring today very often. At the same time, lawyers should be even more obedient to the principles, rules, and provisions of the legal system, and loyalty to politicians or politics may only occur in situations which do not raise concerns over the legality of concrete activity or behavior. In democracy, the rule of law bounds every member of the society, including politicians, who, despite having the ability to write and rewrite the laws, must reach political consensus over the substance and meaning of legal norms. Being loyal to your political party or even to your constituents does not strengthen the legitimacy for violation of the law. Okay, but these are fundamentals. Let us look deeper into how the system really works. If you don't mind, I'd like to very briefly refer to some of my research results from the analysis of American governmental system. While analyzing concrete institution, I always ask myself one crucial question. Is the clash of law and public policy a result of personal features of character of a politician who violates or overuses the law, or maybe it is a consequence of some institutional flaws which enable or encourage politicians and lawyers to be loyal rather to politics than to the law? In most cases, the answer, of course, is very complex, but it often comes down to a basic finding, which I'm trying to present in some of my publications or during some conferences and seminars, that there are flaws in the system which lead to negative consequences of the interconnection between law and public policy. In other words, we are only humans, and if the system enables people to use the law for political purposes, they will, from time to time, use it to reach their own purposes, personal and economic gains, private or group interests, or generally, as we call them, political goals. I can provide you with some examples, and if we have, of course, time in the second part during the discussion part, we can elaborate more on these issues if you're interested to talk about this. One of the most attractive and quite popular examples of the interference of law and politics occurs in a very important institution for American democracy, in the US Supreme Court. As we all know, it's the highest court in the judicial system, which does not only create binding precedents, but also has the ability to impose judicial review and change the meaning of the Constitution. Having impact on the scope of the powers of the government or the scope of the rights and freedoms of individuals, the court is in the center of political interests, which can be observed both in the appointment process of the justices as well as in the decision-making process. Generally since 1930s, US Senate has been playing, as some researchers say, a nomination game with the president over the choice of proper justices. The word proper usually referred to the ideology of the candidates towards certain issues, such as the scope of federal-state relations, the approach towards judicial review, the approach towards criminal justice system, and many other topics, such as recently the topic of abortion and the right to privacy, raised by the court in the famous Dobbs decision, famous or infamous, depending, of course, on who reads it. Politicization of the appointment process, which may be observed, is a result of another important process which we analyze from theoretical perspective, which is called judicialization, of American politics. We can talk about this later if there's space for this. Furthermore, lobbying pressures from the government may be observed during the decision-making process in the court, which, for example, are active in the role of the Solicitor General who represents the government in the court. We can mention a special institution, CVSG, calls for the views of the Solicitor General, or amicus curiae role, the friend of the court of the government in cases in which the United States are interested. I'm not saying that the judges are not independent, but rather that their independence, due to the construction of the system in such a way, may be weakened by various political processes. Another, it's the second and last example for now, of possible negative consequences of the interference of law and politics may be observed in the office of the US Attorney General. In the US, and it's quite interesting to observe similarly, like in Poland, the structure of the office is monistic, meaning that the Attorney General is the chief law officer of the nation who should be loyal to the law and at the same time is the head of the Department of Justice, serving as a political appointee who should be loyal to the president. Historically, there were numerous examples of the presidents using their attorneys general to legitimize their policies, which were planned to be implemented or which were already pending, and presidents needed justification. You can remind yourselves about the examples of tense legal political relations between such presidents and AGs as Andrew Jackson and Roger Taney, John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert, Ronald Reagan and Edwin Meese III, or George W. Bush and John Ashcroft. The problem of loyalty stems not only from the role of the Attorney General, who is the legal advisor to the president, but mainly from the ability of the chief executive to remove the Attorney General anytime he or she wants. As President Andrew Jackson, historically in the 1830s, once stated to his Attorney General Roger Taney, I'm paraphrasing this, but I hope that the sense is still covered. Find for me the law legitimizing my policies, or I will remove you from the office and find such an Attorney General who will be more effective in that perspective. And of course, there were examples in history of such behaviors of presidents, and the most recent one was the removal of AG Jeff Sessions by President Trump due to the involvement of the officer in the investigation concerning the 2016 Trump's electoral campaign, alleged problems and challenges. So generally, political arguments became more important than legal ones several times in the office of the U.S. Attorney General. As we all know, already in 1830s, the Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville noticed that, and I'm quoting here, scarcely any political question arises in the United States that is not resolved sooner or later into a judicial question, which determines the specific character of that governmental system. Law affects public policy in the US, which can be observed during the pending midterm election campaign and in any other presidential campaign in history. But such interconnections also occur in other countries, including Poland. Therefore, we may try to come, of course, it's too early to generalize, but we try to come to a kind of general conclusion that not only it's a problem of human nature, personal or group interests, which can be the source of negative consequences of that interconnection between law and politics, but also institutional, systemic, or structural problems and challenges. We must not forget that institutions, although functioning within a legal system, are the creation of politicians. So I would generally stop here, hoping that we'll have the opportunity to discuss some of the issues I raised, but also the issues that other distinguished panelists are planning to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And now let me pass the floor to Mr. Tomasz Chmal. You are muted.
Oh, I thought that I was muted automatically, but it was my fault. Thank you very much for this very kind invitation and the opportunity to speak about relations between law and public policy. I'm a practitioner, so I have been working for a law firm, White & Case, for 17 years. These days, I run my own boutique. So I will just let me start from excuse. I'm not a TEDx speaker, nor Bill Clinton, so maybe that's not going to be very spectacular. But I would like to start with with a short personal story from back 20 years ago. I was a law school graduate, and in Poland these days, admission to the bar was highly limited. There was old men club controlling the admission to the bar, and number of older lawyers remember that history. Only about 5% of graduates had an opportunity to become professionals, advocates, or legal advisors. And myself also, I tried 6 times to pass the exam, the entry exam, to be admitted for the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship is the 3-year training upon which one would be allowed to pass a bar. And there was a number of smart graduates the same position. And we were very angry. We were disappointed because of this old men's club controlling the admission. And they did not allow basically a fresh blood to the bar, which meant for them a competition. So what we have done, we approached Elżbieta Jaworowicz, a famous Polish journalist, sort of Polish Oprah Winfrey. In 2003, she made a TV program on the issue. And then we approached Polish politicians who were running for elections, and they accepted our point of view. They won elections, they changed the law, and they basically introduced the open admission to the bar. And the change was for good, and it continues. The bar admission is open since. Was that a lobbying? Was this an interference into legislative protest? Surely it was. We used media, we met politicians, we discussed with them, we presented our case. And there was sort of a founding stone of why I decided to pursue this sort of professional route, professional career. And lobbying in Poland and also in the US and public affairs, the interference of advocacy toward the politicians has a negative PR, right? I mean, it's viewed as illegal. Sometimes it's like lobbying means corruption, right? Basically, it's I think it's very unfair treatment, unfair approach toward the law and how the group of interest interfere with the law. And also, these are not only problems with the admission to the bar. There are numerous problems, everyday problems of business organization, of other groups that have various interests. And they should have a right to impact the legislative process. So, so this was, the law is passed too quickly, is without proper consideration, consultation. It creates problem for numerous industries, individuals. So what I do advocate is this lobbying process and interference of the stakeholders toward a thoughtful legislation is very valuable. And from my perspective, lobbying, public affairs, advocacy, whatever you call it, it's a professional sort of service that you basically represent clients, not before court, but you represent clients before public administration and politicians. And you advocate, you persuade, you use various tools, various mechanisms in order to have things done, as we did with this admission to the bar in the past. So is this practice very different to what we normally call a law practice? Well, to some extent, it is different. We use different methods, basically, of creating public opinion. But what I think is required is a mix of hard and soft competences. So from hard perspective, you need to very clearly understand the legislative process. You know, it's how it goes and what is important, who is important in this process, and what makes you sort of successful. Another aspect, sort of more soft one, is the analysis of shareholders or stakeholders in this case. You know, who actually takes decision? I mean, what he or she thinks, what is reasoning behind this legislation, what impacts decision, what arguments could be used in order to persuade the otherwise they usually think. And it also differs from the legal perspective that this aspect or this practice of public affairs is also not just legal. It has to, I mean, one has to understand policy, politics, the politicians' KPIs, for example, elections, There's also a psychology aspect, there is sociology aspect, there is media relation, as we used in our case. There's also understanding various experts and their comfort zone, what they could say, what they could not say, and how we would use their expertise in order to present it to the stakeholders. There are also various other instruments, right? Writing letters or statements or creating public protests even, right? So there are a number of other sort of tools than just an agreement or a memorandum or so basically typical legal tools we usually use in order to have things done. Oh, thank you. So there's another difference between practicing law and practicing sort of advocacy or public affairs practice. It's the documentation you usually create is much shorter. It has to be concise. It has to be understood. It has to be presented in a sort of readable way. In order to be understood by a number of people. So it has not to be very hermetic, like usually in the legal contracts that are very very carefully drafted and are sort of complicated for average layman to read and understand what is supposed to be done. So a couple of lessons learned from my perspective. I mean, in practicing public affairs or lobbying or advocacy, there are three most important elements. These are relations, and relations. So it's always based on that. If you know people, you understand people, then you are able to create the proper outcome of your performance. But similarly to law practice, especially the one before court, there is some courage required. I mean, in this case, I would highly recommend Nicholas Taleb's book, Skin in the Game, because sometimes you have to risk. I mean, you have to sort of take some risk, personal risk even, to create this your argument and present your argument when everybody's saying no, this is not possible, this is not going to happen. I mean, quite often they see just one point of view and they just don't want to hear any other points of view, and then you have to do it. So you are one against all sometimes, but it's worth doing it. And also, it's good to have a political background and general interest in politics, because if you don't like it, if you don't feel this, how politicians think, it's much more complicated to get to the point they would like to listen to you and understand what you're saying. So this is basically an initial thought from myself about the practical aspect and interference, as Professor Laidler said, between law and politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting discussion of the practical perspective. And now let me pass the floor to Ms. Grisella Martinez, who will also share with us her practical experience, but from the other side, the side of the public authorities.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I absolutely love being here as an alumnus of the Catholic University, Jagiellonian University program. It was really a very transformative program in summer for me to participate in. And so I'm glad to be doing this now, especially with my former colleague that summer, Tomasz, Chmal. We were both there during the same summer in Krakow. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much. You know, in my career, I've done a lot of different things. I've worn a lot of different hats that have touched on many of the things actually that both Professor Adler and Tomasz mentioned in terms of, let's call it the different constituencies, the different stakeholders that you're going to encounter in a public policy or government relations or kind of, you know, advocacy career, whatever it is that you want to call it when you're dealing with you know, policy work. There's a lot of different hats that I have worn in my career. whether it's been working directly with clients on direct legal matters, whether it's been working for the federal judiciary, whether it's been working in Congress, whether it's been working for the administration and the executive, whether it's been working in the nonprofit world, working on behalf of nonprofit stakeholders. So I've worn a lot of different hats that I think, to me, when I think about how I view the intersection of law and public policy, are really about kind of a 360-degree view. So I've been lucky to kind of, I've also been a lobbyist similar to Tomasz. So I've seen kind of public policy making from many different lenses, which to me is very much, I think, an asset in this work, because it reminds you of not just looking at something through your own lens, but considering how other people are going to view what it is that you're trying to achieve when you're trying to enact public policy. And I will say that I am, it's funny, I would say that I'm probably would consider myself an optimist realist. There's this great quote that I love that says, "The pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sails." And so I think, I think of myself as an optimist realist, because I think in the world of public policy, you are constantly adjusting the sails. You're hoping for things to change, but you're constantly adjusting to changing conditions. And I think that's what's a little bit different than kind of, let's call it a straightforward legal career, is that so much is constantly changing, much more so than I think you will find in a traditional legal career. And I would view it as more of, I know the professor described it as a clash, perhaps between policy and law, but I view it as more of an ebb and flow. Let's call it more of a harmonization. Perhaps that's the optimist in me. But I would say that largely what I think, and Tomasz touched on a little bit of this, was, there's a very real difference in the advocacy world between theory and practice, right? Between what kind of is understood on paper, but what actually happens, in real life. And I think that applies to both how Congress operates, how the executive operates, how stakeholders and lobbyists operates, and then kind of, the theory of that versus how it really happens. And a lot of that is driven by personalities. A lot of that is driven by relationships, as Tomasz pointed out, which I think, especially in the world of government relations, relationships are, I think, one of the key ways in which things get done, regardless of what party you are, what your interests are. I think that's a very key part of it, but also too, this idea of what I would call hard and soft skills, right? So the hard skills, the legal acumen, the ability to read legislative text and understand kind of the legal implications of it, the ability to draft a memo explaining a complex theory or law or regulatory outcome that's going to flow from any policy changes. So there's those hard skills, which I think, honestly, having had a legal career, having the legal background is tremendously helpful when you're doing that work. I don't think it's 100% necessary if you want to be doing public policy work, but it is very helpful. And I think you will find that, at least in Washington, D.C., we have a lot of lawyers that are doing this work across the board and in many different capacities. But I think the soft skills are, I think, also incredibly important. And I think many of you may have already experienced this in some of the legal work that you're doing, right? Just like the relationship that you would want to maintain with your client, the relationship you would want to maintain with a judge that you appear before, relationship with a law professor, all of these things. I think relationships become even more important in the world of public policy making, because it's really, I think, very much a system that's built on reputation, kind of whether people consider you what I would call an honest broker, how people see kind of what you are bringing to them, the veracity of what you're bringing to them, and the willingness to work together. And so much of that is built on relationships. And so I would say that Washington, D.C. is a place that is constantly changing, whether it's because of the electoral process every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. There's always these changes and these ebbs and flows. And so I think pursuing a career in public policy to me means really being able to kind of be flexible, to kind of go with the changes that come, understand that, yes, even, one day one party might be in power, the next 2 years later, it might be somebody different. I don't think that means that certain issues can or cannot move ahead. I think, there's always so much that we hear about the politicization of certain things and kind of what things are possible to move forward or not. But ultimately, I think there's so much that I think that the public doesn't hear about that is accomplished through bipartisanship, through other ways of kind of enacting things. And then maybe sometimes they're not the big ticket items. They're not the things that are very sexy or that the news reports on, but there is, I think, always a very great desire, I have found in my experience, to get things done and to move things forward. And so, and a lot of that often does come down to a combination of hard skills and soft skills. And so I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure that we're leaving plenty of time for discussion. But again, so grateful to be here and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much for all of your presentations, which were so much interconnected with one another and really gave us the whole array of the complicated and very complex issue. So right now, let me pass the floor to the audience, and we will most gladly hear about your questions and comments. And also, if the speakers have questions or comments to one another, we'll be more than happy to hear them. Plus, it always gives sometimes for the audience to get the courage to talk. Oh, I can see Professor Laidler, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the audience, I think, today. But first of all, let's not professor ourselves here. If it's an American-style meeting, I'm Paweł. Okay, so please, that's the first thing. Thank you. The second thing is, of course, our perspectives are different because you're practitioners. I mean, Grisella is in the middle of that system, and I really, in a positive way, envy that. I mean, that's great that you had so many hats, which gives you a lot of experience and strengthens the final result of your observation, how the system works. I completely agree with you about this accomplishment thing. So the fact is that we usually, I mean, that's why the media are for today, to try to point out about the flaws of the system, how things don't work, and how it affects, the people. We are all polarized. Unfortunately, we live in a very strange moment in history. Therefore, it's easier for us to raise these examples of the negative consequences. But of course, I mean, so that is kind of my approach, which I try to look into various institutions, trying to refer also to these human experiences, but not always saying that, not every US Attorney General, not every US Supreme Court, just as if most of them were doing things correctly. The problem is, however, if the system encourages sometime kind of behavior. You were both talking about lobbying, which is the essence, of course, and I agree with Tomasz, who mentions that many people, again, it's the kind of same language approach, think that lobbying is bad. I mean, my favorite approach to lobbying was the Distinguished Gentleman or Distinguished Senator movie with Eddie Murphy. About how lobbying looks like. I mean, of course, it's a very strange way to show how things look like, but lobbying is the essence. And in the US, since I would say they started it in 1940s, but definitely since 1990s, 1995 was a very important act which controlled lobbying. So, I mean, that's obvious that many congressmen that end their careers are just moving to K Street and doing, not only doing money, but also having impact on how on how the world is operating. So in that perspective, I would also like to refer to the optimistic and pessimistic approach. I mean, I don't want the people who listen to us to strengthen or deepen their stereotype that there is an American who is very optimistic, whatever is happening, and there's a Pole who's always pessimistic because it's our feature of character. There's something in there. However, of course, I'm very glad to hear, and I really appreciate that approach, trying to show that the system works, because in the very end, I can talk for hours about institutional flaws. And you may end that discussion just saying one sentence. Hey, mister, the system works, okay? It's 200 years or more. American democracy had very difficult moments, but it's always on the top. So I would say that despite these flaws, despite these problems, there is something, and maybe these are the things that you mentioned about the relationship between law and politics and a culture and a relationship between people. There is something magical that despite these flaws allows the system to work correctly. And I believe these are people. Thank you.
I have one comment to what Grisella just said a few minutes ago about this different hats. I like this this picture of different hats and just being in different organizations, different jobs, different tasks. It's so important to be sort of open to various opportunities, various places. And this also creates this relation and creates this impact. And that's a very valuable perspective, because if you just focus on one area of law, for example, or one type of contracts, I mean, you're experts in derivatives, for example, or any other. Well, it's a good thing. I mean, in professional practice is a great thing, because you are number one in doing particular type of job, and you are appreciated by your clients because you are experts, sort of, right? But in this profession, you need to jump from one place to the other, and you have to sort of be involved in NGOs and create different projects and be leader of it or be part of it. And it's so interesting, because this is the only way you meet people, you do things, and people understand where you're coming from and where you're getting to, and that also create this honest broker sort of not only image, but it's a fact, basically, because if you do a number of things, people recognize you, and that's very helpful. So that's thank you for this impression, Grisella.
Thanks very much for your changing questions and answers, and as well as comments. So maybe I would have one question, seeing that the audience still hasn't yet had the courage to ask. What you professionally, we are all lawyers, but what you professionally do is sometimes in a very limited way connected with law, but rather with some kind of interpersonal skills, like in politics and dealing with politics, analyzing politics. To what extent the legal education helps in it, even if it's not directly connected with the primary area of your research or the primary area of your professional capacity?
I mean, I'll address that quickly, because I spoke on it already a little bit, and then I'll let Tomasz and Paweł speak to it. But I would say one of the things that I think is the most helpful is the way that law school teaches you to think. And I think primarily one of the things that I have found is the most useful is when you think about you're drafting, let's say you're working on a case and you're drafting a statement of facts, right? And then you're thinking about, well, what is the presentation of the facts in like the favorable light to your client? And that to me is basically the essence of a lot of the work that gets done in public policy. What are the facts? What is the most critical, essential information? What is it that I need to kind of focus on? And what is the way in which I want to present these facts that is the most credible and kind of the most, but also the most kind of favorable to the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And I think that the way that, law school really teaches you to distill many issues down to kind of a core essence, I think that's one of the best skills that I learned as a result of having that training. It has served me well in many different capacities of public policy making.
Just to add to that, I'm sorry.
Please, Tomasz, please.
No, just briefly, because that's a part of this hard skills, right? You have to understand the legislative process. That's key importance, because you may be too early, you may be too late with your statement, with your position, with your paper, with your arguments. So that's that you have to be just on time, and that's a procedural aspect. But also it's this. There is another sort of very important or aspect, which is the you have to understand the law. Basically, you have to understand what you are reading and what you are trying to draft, and how this would influence the whole system. Because even if you propose for deletion one sentence, well, it may create some damage for the whole legislation, or it may have a different impacts in other acts. So it's so important to understand, how the law works, and not only sort of it's not only about relations, not only about that, but I understand we are in the crowd of lawyers or future lawyers. So that's. We're just trying to add this sort of soft skill angle to the hard one, which we get from the law school or through the apprenticeship.
Well, if I may add something to this, of course, thank you, Wojciech. You made my day calling me a lawyer, and I will remember that till the end of my life. Of course, I'm a graduate of the Faculty of Law, but among lawyers, I wouldn't call myself a very lawyer, but I'm really teaching also some aspects of American legal system, also the US constitutional law. So I can try to look also from the educational perspective, as the question also refers to the role of the university. I remember my education at the Faculty of Law. Of course, I'm not looking too deep today into the whole curriculum of the faculty, but we are discussing it with other deans during our meetings, and we all agree, and I think this already was there 20 years ago or more, definitely more, when I graduated. Law broadens perspectives. That, like we discussed in the beginning of our meeting here, still offline, saying that this famous joke refers to, you can be whoever you want, but tell me if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, because these are the demanded professions. Why? It's not only about the money. It's not only about the money. My story is like this. I really didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. That's why I decided to go to study law, because I believed, and I think it was a good choice, that it does not limit me to certain issues, such as other education lawyers in different dimensions. But the fact is that the studies, because of their, as was mentioned by Grisella, the kind of perspective that broadens the mind, the critical thinking, I think it's a crucial issue. We're also trying to do it at political science, at the Faculty of International Political Studies. Critical thinking is the most important thing. Of course, hard issues such as concrete provisions, despite the fact that they be changed overnight and you learn them to pass the exam, and the next day or next year, you don't have to remind them, but it gives you an ability how to read it, how to interpret it, how to, as Tomasz mentioned, understand the law. But there's another thing. It's impossible to learn and understand the law without a broader context. We call it interdisciplinarity, which on one hand, it's a very nice word because you may put anything there, but in practical aspect, I would say it's only a value for education. You cannot, and especially it's in the US, as the multi-hat case gives us this perspective. I mean, you need to understand the society. You need to understand the culture. You need to understand the political process. It's not only, of course, it's important to understand legislative process and how lobbying works, but you also need to understand words in certain contexts. You need to learn history to understand why certain processes occurred. So I think that legal studies today are giving that to our students and future graduates. You can be like a lawyer in one discipline, but you can also have a broader perspective on life, and you have more opportunities. That is my experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from the audience. What would you change if you had a time machine and now you imagine yourselves in 5 years' time? So a little more private question, but you can also put it into your legal and other professional background.
I understand this is for the future, right? Or what we would have changed in the 5 years ago. Past and future. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Well, as for the past, I don't think I would change much actually, because I think that 17 years at White & Case was a good idea, and I learned the law and the practice, and what the hard work means. So that helps in my own boutique, and also being a part of various NGOs and creating various projects. It was fun. So I wouldn't change much. But for the future is what I would wish for. Well, I think that that was somehow touched upon by Grisella about the bipartisanship, right? I mean, it seems it does not work in Poland these days. I think it's so the public policy is sort of very strongly divided, and it's very difficult. It's also part of my job to create that. But imagine a situation where you have, let's say, a huge investment to be built in a city center, in a city. Let's say it's a new plant, and you have to have a sort of agreement with the city, and also you have to have an agreement with the government, the central government. So, and usually these two governments, local government and the central government, these days they are in conflict. So, and you as an investor, you want to have this sort of consent from both parties. So it's very difficult to achieve that, because if one party says okay, the other party would say no, it's not okay, because that would be your success, not my success. So this is very difficult. This is something that I would try to sort of argue, and what I actually do is to argue that that not every sort of issue has to be a sort of partisan issue, and it has to be a sort of compromise found between the two. In order to get things done, not just not create the policy or politics per se, who is sort of damaging the entire process, investment process, and it's not creating value for the society and for anybody, because there's a clash between the two. And I would very much see more bipartisanship sort of approach toward resolving things in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much for this.
You're on mute, Wojciech. Can't hear you.
Like any your perspective to add to that question.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that I probably wouldn't change anything about the last 5 years. Things have gone well for me, and I've enjoyed the things that I've worked for. I've been really lucky over my career to work always with very smart, very dynamic, very driven people who truly care about good public policy outcomes for the American people. And so I feel very positive about that. And I would just say for the future I love learning. I love learning about anything and everything. I'm always trying to kind of expand, what I'm doing, what I'm learning about, what I'm working on. And so for me, I would just hope in the next 5 years, I continue to learn new things, work with new people, continue to grow professionally. I think that's super important. It's easy, I think, to get stagnant in your careers. And obviously for those folks of you who are just starting out in your careers, don't get stuck, just hopefully you're always going to continue to look for professional development opportunities. And I try and stay open to everything, because I have found that if you stay open to all of the opportunities, if you don't rule things out, usually things I feel have a way of kind of presenting themselves to you that may be new things that you never thought about doing in your career, or things that you decide all of a sudden you're going to specialize in something and that had not maybe occurred to you before because you weren't open to it. And so I just say, stay open, continue to learn. Those are always really my own goals. And I never plan 5 years ahead. The most I plan ahead is maybe 2 years. So I don't have a 5-year plan. I might have a 2-year plan, but not a 5-year plan.
Okay, thank you. If I'm, it's a very tricky question, so we can try to find some tricky answers. I mean, definitely what I really don't like about the world that the time is passing so quickly, and it's the clock is ticking too fast. You know, I have got 2 sons, and one of them is almost 18, the other one is 11. So still trying to get connection there. If I could turn back the hands of clock of time, maybe I would devote more time for them. It's so, you know, it's such an obvious answer to focus more on, and profession is important, but also family matters. But I don't know if the reality came back, if I wouldn't be the same Paweł Laidler who really focuses on the same things. And going back to the profession, you know, I became a dean 2 years ago, and of course there were difficult moments and there were also successful moments. And I think this is how it's in life. Life is kind of a roller coaster, and of course the best thing is to try to still stay on top, or when as in my favorite, sorry, I'm very much Americanized movie, Jerry Maguire, in one of the houses there was a sign saying "Sesame Sportsman." So definitely I would like to have more impact on encouragement of young people today. I'm talking about students, I'm talking about doctoral students, I'm talking about my employees. I see that the time, you know, that we are hopefully ending, you know, the COVID and post-COVID reality changed a lot in the approach of people to the reality. It's a social problem today, and a lot of people do have different types of problems. I would love people to be able to be happy. But of course, you know, it sounds very utopian. So I would say that the best thing is, as Grisella said, the possibility to learn. If I had a chance, if I had more time, not only to devote to my family, but also I would love to learn more languages, because I believe this is the biggest value. I'll always tell my sons, well, you may be a lawyer, you may be a doctor, or you may be whoever else, but learn the languages, because whatever you do in life is going to help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, I have another question from the audience, actually, it's in a private message, but I will read it. How is it that lobbying, actually people convincing politics to do something, is considered as something bad, whereas the behavior to the contrary is totally acceptable, like people convincing people to vote them? Yeah, so like this person really observed that maybe the two-side story. Is it the case of actually sometimes criminal involved in lobbying, and that's the case of Marek Dochnal, who is like the most famous lobbyist from the past in Poland. Who is it? Him who made this profession like a badly perceived one? How would you react, and how would you say what to do to change the way the lobbyist is perceived in politics and law?
Well, unfortunately, it's very true. It's still the perception of the profession we do is rather negative. It's as I said, it's sort of sometimes equal to corruption, which is basically not. I'm not going to corrupt anybody, because it's just short-sighted. But and there, like in every profession, you have black sheep, and then they create the image of entire profession, which is bad. But I hope that it will change over time, and that basically what you need to do is not to be afraid of speaking about it, speaking openly, and present yourself as a professional and do the professional job. And obviously there is a kitchen behind, but this kitchen is not something that you have to be ashamed of. Is number of meetings, number of discussion, number of persuasion, and finding arguments, finding people, finding supporters. So we always fight with this image. At least I do fight with this image, and that's one of the reasons I agreed to participate in this panel to present that this is a regular professional job. Which is very normal in DC, which is very normal in Brussels, because I also had an opportunity to set a lobbying hub for Polish companies in Brussels. So a number of Polish state-owned companies, they decided to sort of create own sort of body to lobby EU authorities. And they're pretty successful in doing that. And without doing, I mean, in Brussels, like Germans, they do have a couple of thousands lobbyists registered, and I'm also registered in Brussels. And there are also French and Poland still has like 100, 200 lobbyists registered in Brussels, which is very limited. And one part of it is because it's viewed as something illegal. The second is because it's viewed as something very expensive. Both are sort of not true, because if you look at from the cost perspective, you also have a chance to look from the investment perspective. I mean, how much you can lose and how much you can earn, how much you can lose not being there, not being represented properly, vis-a-vis your competitors from other countries, be represented there and be professional. So that's another. It's a huge opportunity for Polish students to look at these sort of profession, because it seems that the Polish market is legal market is kind of saturated, or is getting to the point it's less people interested in practicing law. But Brussels is still sort of El Dorado for Polish representatives, because there is a shortage of Polish lawyers, Polish lobbyists representing industries and the Polish companies. So that's how I look at this profession and its future.
Thank you very much. Paweł, Grisella, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I'm probably, again, the least practitioner in that perspective, but I agree that, especially in Poland, there are a lot of negative approaches towards lobbying. It's not only Dochnal, it's generally a kind of a feeling that it is about big money. And of course, when you look also into the US system, although there are certain rules and there's an amount of accountability, control, and transparency, which is a very important element of this whole process. Of course, there are some elements which you could raise by saying that they can spoil the system. I think that one of the topics I did research on, which is the campaign finance, which is the question, referred to lobbying, but also the other side of the elections. I mean, what's the role of the politician? I mean, let's try to define politics. Politics is about gains and losses. Politics, it's about ruling. I mean, that's the main purpose of politics. So politicians do what they are meant to do. And of course, the tools are important. We're not only talking about natural elements of campaign, but we are talking about money. Money is really important in campaigns, and it's a huge amount of money nowadays, and it's evolving. It's billions now in presidential campaign in the US. So of course, once there's an idea to create PACs, then historically there had to be certain rules that control these political action committees, which collected the money. So they came up with an idea of super PACs, and now there's a necessity to control that system. And of course, the famous saying that money is like liquid; they always find a way to go in the system. That's probably, as Tomasz mentioned, the problem that many people connect the dots and say it's a negative thing. But what is lobbying? Lobbying is the most natural aspect of our life. My kids coming to me and willing to obtain something. Daddy, can I play more the computer game? I mean, of course, and he's trying to lobby me in different ways, not really knowing that this is lobbying. So I think it's a natural element, and I completely agree with this Brussels idea. I would add to this that lobbying does not only mean, this business area, of course, important, and Tomasz has most experience in there. But I would say that another topic you can look into, and this is very attractive for lawyers, the graduates of Polish universities, look into institutions, governmental and non-governmental institutions all over the world. There are a lot of them. UN institutions, EU institutions. Look into the number of Polish officers, of the number of Polish lawyers in these institutions. It's not a big number. Some of them, it's getting better. This is also an important aspect of lobbying. Polish government should lobby more on the policy level. But it's about you. It's about your choices. It's about, you know, connecting the dots and trying to file applications. And there is a necessity to have more and more representation, because the representation of Poles in different international institutions will help to strengthen the position of the country. And it's also connected with lobbying. So I would say that a lot of aspects of life are about lobbying, also at the university. We're also ahead. In 2 years, we have elections, and I can feel these tensions and lobbying around. That spoils the system, but we are trying to defend ourselves. Thanks.
And if I could just quickly add on, I would say to what Paweł just talked about in terms of diversification of, you know, government, let's call it government and government relations, especially here in Washington, D.C. That's been a topic that has very much been top of mind, but from a different perspective here in the United States about the number of African-American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian American individuals in the field of both the federal government. So who actually works for the federal government, who works in Congress, who is represented in the lobbying community, you know, et cetera. And so there's been a lot of discussion around those topics, especially over the last few years, and also this idea of sustainability. What is sustainable, especially, you know, wages has been a big issue in terms of how do wages that are paid to congressional staff translate into a diverse staff, or maybe not a diverse staff. You know, is there a case that, you know, you have more staff of color who, you know, kind of cannot stay as federal employees that have to go into the lobbying community because there's more kind of, you know, wages to be earned. There's a lot of different ways in which the diversification piece plays out here in the United States, and certainly in the Washington, D.C. government relations world. Obviously slightly different than in Poland, but still the idea and the topic of representation has been a very, very focused one, especially in the last few years here. So very important.
Thank you very much. I think we can stop the recording part.